Due to Ontario's guidelines, we are presenting these live streaming events in a virtual environment to keep everyone safer. We hope you will join us in the next several weeks. Please stay safe and stay well. Hi and good afternoon. Welcome to our live streaming event for the Webequie Supply Road project. I'm Don Parkinson, consultation lead for the project, and I'd just like to thank you for joining us today. We've got a pretty interesting session today talking about socioeconomics and gender-based analysis. But maybe before we get started, I just wanted to tell you the purpose of these streaming sessions. Beyond just for general information, we are doing this in the face of the COVID-19 pandemic, and we're trying to adapt to this new normal and use different techniques to communicate with communities and get information out about the project. So before we get started talking about socioeconomics with our special guest today, let's look at a video that talks a bit about the aspirations and hopes of Webequie community members. In this case, about the possibility of getting an ice rink with some shelter to protect them from the weather. So let's have a look at that video. We'll watch only part of it, and then we'll show the longer video maybe later on, or we'll definitely make it available via the website. So let's go play that video right now.
They're at the 11-minute mark in the third period.
Maple Leafs basic, Red Wings,
Face-off will be in the lead zone at this end.
Red Wings
You can hear them. Grosso, Wares, Abel.
Maple Leafs.
And the Nick
Don
Met and John Met. They're at the back of their own net.
For me, like my son will be in high school next year, and well, me and my husband were talking about it still, like it might be best for him to go to high school in Thunder Bay or anywhere instead of here, because we don't have an arena and he wants to skate.
Actually, the old community of Webequie used to be a gathering place where all of the different families, while they were out during the winter, came back to the community, which was traditionally known as Kijibanika, which means at the end of the lake. And this is where our community members used to gather.
Like I had to wear long johns, I had to wear a sweater, a hoodie on top, and put all my gear. Sometimes it wasn't that comfortable, but at least I played hockey. So.
I try usually keeping this rink good every day. Usually come out and shovel, trying to do the edges. Yeah.
Is it hard to do conditioner out here?
Yeah, it's usually very cold and windy.
Yeah?
And snowy.
So you have to go out of town to condition, or?
Yeah, I just was gonna try and leave to the arena, but I can't get enough money.
Webequie is located roughly 527 kilometers away from Thunder Bay and is constantly told about the billions of dollars of value in their ring of fire.
We need an arena. Guys, look at it. Look at this whole place. It's filled with snow.
A market where people can sell their vegetables jogging, maybe track and field if possible, they can do that. Having a place where we can have either summer festivals or even winter carnivals, powwows, as well as hosting tournaments or even hosting regional conferences.
In particular this year, we're having issues with the weather, and also during the summer we don't have any place to go to, like when it's raining or anything like that. And it certainly would help to have an indoor session.
I hope everyone enjoyed that video. That's a preview. We'll make available the full video via the website. I think it is on the website actually right now. And we may show a bit of it maybe at the end of today's session if we have time. So with that, I would like to introduce today's guest, which is Bethany Haalboom. Bethany is a socioeconomics specialist. She's the lead for socioeconomics for the project, and she's going to talk to us a bit today about socioeconomics and what's called gender-based analysis. So welcome, Bethany.
Thank you, Don. It's great to be here.
Oh, I'm glad you're here, and I have a lot of questions for you, as you know. And I'll probably add more questions too, Bethany. I have a bad habit of doing that, so
all right,
for follow-ups.
Okay. Got it.
Okay, let's start off with the socioeconomic impact analysis. Maybe you can take us back a bit and tell us what socioeconomics is and why it's an important part of an environmental assessment.
Right. Thanks, Don. So socioeconomics, it's really just one piece of the environmental assessment, one piece of the human environment component, if you will, of an environmental assessment, which of course we know also connects to the natural environment component. But socioeconomics is about trying to understand how the social and economic conditions of a community could be affected by a development project, which in this case, of course, is the Webequie Supply Road. So we start off by just looking at, okay, what are the social and economic conditions of a community now? And this could be in terms of things like income levels, employment rates, education opportunities, access to social services, housing availability, etc. And from there, we want to figure out how the supply road might affect these things in the future. And this would include both during construction and operation of the road.
So Bethany, sorry to interrupt.
That's okay.
It's basically like a baseline, isn't it? It's establishing a baseline of existing conditions like we do in other areas, whether it's water or other aspects of the natural environment. Is it?
That's correct. Yeah. So in environmental assessment terms, it's called a baseline. I kind of like to think of it as your starting point. Like this is what is there now. This is what we need to determine in terms of how these items or these things might change, these valued components as well, which I'll talk about. That's correct. And so we have that starting point, and then we want to look at, okay, well, what could be the types of impacts on these valued components, these social and economic conditions. And these could be either positive or negative impacts, but we want to try and maximize the social and economic impacts of a supply road, and then avoid, limit, or manage or mitigate the potential negative impacts. So in terms of examples of potential positive impacts or benefits, well, these could include community jobs in road construction and mining, contracts for local businesses, so that could be another positive impact, better access to hospitals and schooling, improved internet access, and improved year-round access to other communities where you might have social or family connections. But of course, there could also be possible negative social and economic impacts from, for example, easier outsider access to your community. So this might include an increase in drug use or crime rates. And these are kind of, the influences you likely don't want. There may also be adverse impacts on hunting or trapping economies.
Bethany, I remember a few years ago doing some work on another project, and I remember a benefit that a community member pointed out that I hadn't thought of, and it was, an all-season road connecting them to the highway would actually allow them to see their kids. If their kids had to go to high school in a major center like Thunder Bay or Geraldton, it would allow them to see their kids more often because, of course, as you know, it's prohibitively expensive to fly, from a remote community into a major center like Thunder Bay. So that was another benefit that I just hadn't thought of, and that's an important one too, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Mobility. Yeah, and I'll go through some more of these a little bit later on in the show, but mobility is a huge one. And as you say, it's very expensive to fly in and out of communities in the far north of Ontario, certainly, and anywhere in Canada in the far north. So that would be a huge benefit.
Okay, I've got another question here for you. So I understand that in an environmental assessment, or EA, criteria and indicators need to be identified. Can you maybe explain what these are and why they need to be identified and how they're used in environmental assessment?
Right. So they're basically fancy words for, well, let's start with criteria. It's a fancy word for things that you might value in your community. So these could be affected by the supply road. So things like social, economic, health, or cultural criteria of the human environment. So an example could be economic activity. But then you've got to try and kind of parse out different aspects of economic activity to try and measure the criteria. So basically, how can you tell if there are any actual changes to them or not? That's what we're kind of trying to operationalize or measure with indicators. So I think the best way is usually to provide an example. At least for me, that's how I think normally as well. And I know a lot of people kind of benefit from examples. So an example of an indicator for economic activity could be community employment rates, or it could also be number of band-owned businesses. And I'm going to give you one more here. Cost of living could be a criterion, I should say. And then the indicator might be, well, the amount of monthly income that you might spend on store-bought foods for a family of 6, say. And these criteria and indicators are one of the reasons it's so important for your community, for Indigenous communities, to review the proposed terms of reference to make sure that we've captured everything under those criteria and indicators, as we know that members know their communities the best. But and don't panic here, because what is in the terms of reference as well is also only preliminary. So these criteria and indicators can also be revised and refined as we move through the impact assessment process.
That's a great point, Bethany. The input is received from the public at all throughout this process, so it doesn't just end once the terms of reference are approved. I'm glad you pointed that out. And I think you touched on something there too when you were talking about cost of living in the community. And I think on that note, I think what we're going to do is we're going to look at a short video with a Webequie community member, I believe it's Leslie, talking a bit about how much things cost in Webequie.
The basic food items like bread would be $7. We get our vegetables for like broccoli would cost $8 a pound. Bacon would be like $12, $13. Bananas for like $13. For meat, ground beef, one pound ground beef would cost $20. We get our eggs, 18 cartons of eggs for what, $14, $13. And a bag of milk would cost roughly $14. For sweets, they cost less than healthy foods.
Wow, there's a lot there, isn't there? It's those prices are pretty shocking. It's really really shocking. Well, back to our questions, Bethany. I've got another one here for you. So now that we've talked about criteria and indicators, my next question is: how do you get the information that you need to do the socioeconomic impact assessment? How do you do that?
Well, that's a great question, Don. And it's probably something that a lot of community members would wonder as well. And we need to collect information in a lot of different ways. But what I can't emphasize enough is that it's with also as much community help as possible. As again, you are the experts in terms of understanding the social and economic conditions of your community you're living it, right? So first we look at basically though, we have to have some kind of starting point again, which is what's already out there, what's available in terms of, it's called secondary information, but it would be often stuff that's already available in documents like community documents, such as land use plans or comprehensive community plans, perhaps economic development plans if they're available, or the census. Um, but that's, as I mentioned, that's just the start. And there can be gaps or missing information in those documents in terms of what we actually need to collect for in terms of indicators. As well, they might need updating, right? They might be a bit old. We need more recent information so that we are able to provide a more accurate picture of the social and economic conditions of your community. And that's where, again, we really need community participation and input. So community members would be asked if they could participate in, for example, a survey, if they could participate in a focus group, which is basically just a group interview with ideally diverse members of your community, so women, youth, elders, and land users, for example. And we recognize right now, under the COVID restrictions in place, that this might not be possible in person. And so the remote kind of option might be a possibility for undertaking these that way, but it depends again on community comfort levels with that as well. And finally, you could participate in a key informant interview, though these will probably be directed more at band administration or staff members who have very specific or special knowledge about social services that are available, housing, education and training, and so forth.
Thanks for that, Bethany. And I should point out that our team is actually looking, because of COVID-19 and the restrictions that are associated with it, our team right now is looking at and testing and developing other ways of achieving what you're trying to do, through the survey. So, for example, we're looking at ways of delivering focus groups remotely. So that's something I think we may see being rolled out in the next few weeks as well. So. Okay, maybe you could tell me a little bit more about the survey. So, what kind of information are you looking to collect?
Right. So this is again just one kind of data collection tool, if you will, and we're looking to collect information on demographics, so age, gender, marital status of community members, access to education, including traditional education. What kind of training and skills community members have or would you like to have, types of employment and employment opportunities or interests that you have, as well as the kind of barriers to employment that there might be, such as mobility, as we mentioned before, in terms of can you get to a workplace easily enough? Also, in terms of childcare or elder care responsibilities, you might have living costs, and you've seen that video regarding food costs being a big one, but there's also housing and energy. social connections that you have in the community, again, availability of transportation, and safety. So how safe do you feel in your community?
That's a lot of information to collect, but it's just so important to collect that information to get a better understanding. And as you said, we need to spend the time talking to community members to gather as much information as possible through some of those sort of more one-on-one or smaller group settings like focus groups to get that information, that unique information from each community. Now, maybe you can tell us a bit about how you'll be conducting the surveys in the communities.
Right, thanks. Yeah, and just as I guess a prelude to that is that, and kind of a platform, sort of tagging off of what you just said, Don. We do certainly recognize that it's a time commitment to, on the part of community members, to fill out these surveys and participate in focus groups. So we try to collect information in a fairly efficient way, but not to the extent that we can't engage meaningfully and enable us, that it would inhibit us rather from collecting kind of more robust forms of information. Anyway, so yes, some of the options for actually collecting or conducting the surveys, which are dependent on COVID restrictions in place, and also on what your community prefers. What are your comfort levels? What would work for you? So one option is online, though we certainly recognize that this is not possible for everyone, given that you may not have reliable internet access. Another option then would be by phone. For example, having a community coordinator phone you up and ask you some of the survey questions. Almost more ideally would be door-to-door surveys, where we could have a community coordinator visit households to help members complete the survey. Now, again, dependent on COVID restrictions in place. And importantly, by filling out the survey, you'll also have the opportunity to enter a draw prize competition. And again, we're really appreciative of the time that you're willing to take to fill out these surveys. And we want to recognize that as well.
Well, that draw prize makes things interesting. It sure does. Yeah, I'm interested already.
Yeah, sorry, you're not eligible, Don.
Yeah, I guess not. Yeah, that's right. Conflict of interest, eh?
Sort of, yeah.
Okay, another question here for you. Are you targeting specific community members with the surveys?
Well, we want and need as many community members as possible to fill out the surveys. So this includes adult men and women, youth, elders, land users, and we're going to be comparing responses across all of those groups.
Okay. Sounds like we need to talk about gender-based analysis plus. Maybe you can explain that a bit for us.
Sure. So it's basically an approach that involves looking at how diverse members of your community view and might be impacted by the Supply Road project. And this is particularly relevant to more vulnerable members, who could include women, elders, youth, for example. And this is also a requirement of the new Federal Impact Assessment Act, where it wasn't before.
That's a great answer. I actually have a question that we received by text that I'm going to ask you right now, real time. How is culture measured with a socioeconomic study?
That's a really great question. And certainly culture is not at all an easy type of thing to measure, right? And actually it's, and I'll get to this a little bit later on in the show, but I'll just hint at it now, if it's okay if I kind of address that later. But it is something that is, okay, so it's something that would be typically not actually within the socioeconomic study. It's hugely important, but it's something that might be measured through, for example, one indicator, which could be language in the socioeconomic study, which is typically in a socioeconomic survey, for example, like which Indigenous language do you speak? How often do you speak it? Is it your first language, etc.? But other aspects of culture, and there are so many, such as traditional land use, your spirituality, your cultural teachings, and so forth, those are normally actually assessed, which isn't maybe always the best word, but we try to understand them and how they could be affected through a traditional land use study, which often includes a strong cultural component with questions to that effect.
That answers it to me. It's a great answer.
I don't know if it'll satisfy members at this moment, but
That's right. Sounds pretty good to me. Okay, just following up on the gender-based analysis plus, is that where the focus groups are also needed to meet with all these different groups to make sure that they're all represented in the work that you're doing?
Yes, exactly. Focus groups are really a way to bring those groups together. So you could have a focus group with women, a focus group with youth, a focus group with elders, and so forth. And in fact, it might be in a focus group with elders that's in the talking about socioeconomics, where these cultural issues would also come up, and that's fine. So I shouldn't just say you can't talk about it. Of course you can talk about it, but it's just that when we try to kind of set these things up in ways that would focus on particular topics or issues, but what people want to talk about is what they want to talk about as well. So getting back to the focus groups, these are really a great opportunity for community members, to talk at length about an issue, which you don't really get to do in a survey, right? The questions are there, they're prescribed, it's yes or no, they're closed-ended, which means you can't expand on your answer. So when we get to the focus groups, it's really your opportunity to share interests, concerns you have about the project, but also we're collecting, of course, some of that baseline information, and share those discussions and have those discussions with others that you have, other members of the community that you have things in common with. For example, it might be something where you're also more comfortable talking to them about certain issues. If we're asking questions about safety or social relationships in the community, a focus group is a really good way to explore these topics. Or culture would be a better way to kind of explore that topic through a focus group or through even an interview, which we'll get to in a minute. But focus groups are a really good way for that kind of richer discussion.
Well, Bethany, it's we often talk with elders from the community. In fact, one member of our team interviewed an elder yesterday, I believe, and these are lengthy discussions, typically in the traditional language. And we learn as a team. We learn so much from those interviews, and we're going to make those available. And we do have some available on our website actually right now. So. There's a lot of information out there. We're trying to understand as much as we can and collect as much information as we can to make sure the study is comprehensive. So going back to the gender-based analysis plus, why is that so important, Bethany? Why is it so important to consider all these different groups?
Right. So we really want to capture a diversity of voices and perspectives from your community. So people can experience things very differently based on their age, their gender, their use of the land, other historical experiences, colonial experiences that they've gone through, that really shape their understanding of the world and the way that they view the world. And so that's important for us to try and understand. Um, and and it's really about us learning from you. Okay, so yeah, we're not necessarily the experts here. You are the experts about your own life experiences and your community. And also, of course, with gender-based analysis, the supply road could have different impacts on depending on your age or your gender, or if you're a land user. In particular, it could have more negative impacts on young women, potentially elders, and land users. But that's just, we don't know yet. That's why we're just, these are examples of where that could be the case.
And you also mentioned about trying to do some interviews with band administration and staff. Maybe you can tell us a bit about the purpose of those activities.
Right. So that's where, and this isn't to say that these would be the only interviews that are conducted. Certainly, if people such as elders, for example, are interested in having an in-depth interview, we could have an in-depth interview with them for a socioeconomic study. It certainly might be needed for it will be needed for a traditional land use study. But when we're talking about interviews with band administration and staff in this context of social and economic conditions, those would be to just understand what social services are available, what's at capacity or nearing capacity, so that we know what could potentially be more impacted by the supply road, and what does your community need access to.
Very good. Well, I think now what we're going to do is we're going to cut to a video with a community member, Leslie, talking about current job opportunities in Webequie and the aspirations of youth in the community. So let's have a quick look at that short video, and then we'll come back and continue our conversation with Bethany.
Most of the jobs in Webequie are located in at the band office, the school, the nursing station, and the store. The youth in my community, they want to learn about their culture or practice their culture, such as hunting, and they want a youth center where they can like hang out, and they want more job opportunities for their growing family, and to save for their kids. My personal aspiration when I was a kid, I wanted to I just wanted to get out of the community and pursue a high level of education and get back to the community and work with my community. When I went back to the community, nothing has changed yet. Soon. I feel like soon.
Okay, we're back. That was a really good video there. It's interesting to hear from Leslie about that. And Bethany, while we were away, we have 3 more questions for you. So we're generating a lot of interest with this topic. So
Great.
I'm going to ask you the first one here.
Okay.
Sorry, 2 more questions. I asked you one of them already. How do you measure Indigenous well-being as part of the socioeconomic survey?
Oh, great question. And actually, I will come to that a little bit later when I talk about health, because health and well-being can often go together. And I say that because, well-being is often, it's something that communities, first of all, can define themselves, and actually should define themselves. What do you consider what do you consider to be well-being for your community? What does it mean to you? What would you want to have measured and looked at in the impact analysis in terms of what could be affected? So is it your cultural and environmental connections? Is it being employed, and so forth? But it's really this collection well-being, if we think of it in broad terms, and this is me kind of defining it here, as you know, the cultural, social, economic, environmental, spiritual factors that come together, health, that all of those factors that come together to understand well-being. So as I kind of, when I consider socioeconomic impact assessments, I consider them as part of the environmental assessment. I consider that just one piece of the well-being picture. So it's really when you bring all of the aspects of the impact assessment together in the human dimension, and then bring in the natural environment as well, that you start to get a picture of community well-being.
Well, great answer, Bethany. Okay, here's another one we got via Facebook. Will Indigenous communities be given a chance to validate the findings from the baseline research prior to assessing potential effects?
Absolutely, yes. This is a very important step in the in any impact assessment. And so we would provide a forum, an opportunity for the community members to review the findings. And in how communities do that, or the specific steps involved, will you know, be determined with, you know, the project team and the community members, and how you want to do that. But absolutely.
Okay, let's go back to my questions. My next one is, what kinds of impacts will you be looking at as part of the socioeconomic impact analysis?
Right. So again, this is going back to specifically the socioeconomic impact analysis, and this is just one piece of the impact assessment. And we're looking at both positive and negative impacts. So examples of positive impacts, these could include employment and economic benefits during construction and operation. So it might be jobs as heavy equipment operation. It could be jobs in environmental monitoring, catering, camp operations. It could be business opportunities along the road, such as gas stations or restaurants, as well as business training that might be provided, possibly higher overall education levels in the longer term, higher household incomes, as well as mobility, again, greater mobility related to having a road there, rather than just a fly-in, fly-out kind of scenario. Examples of negative effects, which I've already mentioned, but I can extend here a bit, are to do with outsider influences, that easier access they might have to your community. And this could result in higher rates of drug and alcohol abuse, potentially higher crime rates, increased rates of violence against women, which we're concerned about, and which we're trying to assess with the GBA, or the Gender-Based Analysis Plus. And as well, increased traffic accidents being a potential negative impact. But there are, of course, other, as you know, I've already been asked some of these questions, and there are these other very important valued components that could be impacted, such as culture, traditional land use, and health, and these will also have to be assessed.
Bethany, can you tell us what kind of impacts might be assessed for what you just mentioned?
Sure, yes. And I want to emphasize that communities are really critical in determining what those indicators are for culture, land use, and health, and how they might be affected. So the other important piece here, of course, or that is the foundation really, is understanding potential impacts on traditional land use as an imperative for understanding and assessing impacts on asserted or established Aboriginal or treaty rights. So possible impacts to culture and land use might be loss of burial sites, changes in access to harvesting areas, loss of traditional teaching sites, inability to connect with and have a relationship with the land. The quality of that relationship may be negatively impacted through, for example, noise or odors or visual disturbances.
I notice you also mentioned health. Do you want to expand on that a little bit?
Right. And this is also, as I said before, connected to, I think, well-being, but it sort of is one piece of that, depending on how you kind of understand health. But health is really important for an impact assessment because it kind of brings everything together in an impact assessment. And that's because there are so many different factors that affect our health. And this includes spiritual, cultural, economic, environmental, social factors. And of course, there's the legacy of colonialism that has had severe and enduring impacts on the health of Indigenous communities. Collectively, these factors can be referred to as health and well-being. And the impact assessment has to consider all of these potential impacts on health and well-being. But again, we need to know what are the important aspects of health to understand in your community. How do you want to understand health and have it be assessed? What kind of stories do you want to tell about the health of your community and your people? Now, some of this can be captured through other parts of the impact assessment, such as socioeconomic factors affecting health, like being employed and being able to provide for your family. We know these factors impact health, but they're captured in the kind of socio-economic section of an impact assessment. And then there's traditional land use, of course, where cultural and environmental connections or being out on the land, we know that affects your health. And then that's just one piece of the health assessment, because there's also a human health risk assessment done to figure out how changes in noise or air quality or consumption of country foods, which we know are very healthy, how that could affect the health of communities. And it gets a bit confusing because I realize, all of these things are kind of seem like they're being assessed in a disconnected way, but we try to bring them all together so that those connections are made and we understand things in a holistic way that also reflects, of course, the worldview of Indigenous peoples. And so to do all this, we first need to understand the health of your community as it is now, and then what you think shaped your health, and consider how it could be affected by the road, and if effects need to be avoided, limited, managed, or mitigated, and if they can't be, then accommodated or compensated.
Okay, we have received a couple more questions. One by text. I can probably tackle this one, Bethany. What types of jobs would be available for Indigenous people during construction? So, well, there would be a lot of different types of jobs available. It would be some associated with prepping the road corridor, so clearing and grubbing of vegetation. They would be laying out the road corridor itself, heavy equipment operation, camp operations, waste management operations. There's a lot of different types of jobs. There's a lot that's involved in the construction of something, even though it's a what you would think is a simple 2-lane gravel road. There's a lot of people involved in that, a lot of people who do different types of jobs as well. So here's one that we got via email. With the road open, do you think there might be a possibility to have surveillance to control the entry of drugs and alcohol? Bethany, I can take that one or you can take that.
Well, yeah, I could just say one thing briefly, and you can build on it if you like, or say what you had in mind. But I was going to say that that would be an example of a mitigation. So if after, if that was going to be a potential impact, then we could think about with the community mitigation measures that could be put in place, and that could be something that would be considered for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point, and I this concern has been raised on previous projects I've worked on in the same area, and it's a valid point, and I think it's something that's probably inevitable, some form of security to ensure that that there is control over what comes into the community. I think so. That's something, like you said, it's something to mitigate or reduce the impact of that risk. So, with
can I just
sure,
Don, can I just say one more thing about that? I just want to say that your community will have the opportunity to discuss and come up with possible mitigation measures, or discuss the kind of viability of ones that we might propose or put forward in a meeting or an engagement and consultation session specifically on that topic.
Okay, that's great. I did get one more email question. I don't know how easily I can answer this one. What distance will it be from the road to the nearest healthcare center? So, if this road is built, there would be the nursing station in Webequie, and there might be another healthcare center, associated with any mining developments as well too. So, but once this road is built, and and maybe there's going to be other roads built that connect it to major centers, then all of a sudden access to healthcare improves significantly. So that's a very good question.
Yeah, can I say something about
sure,
just one
absolutely.
Yeah, that comes through, especially I think with a question like that, in what's called the cumulative impact assessment, cumulative assessment for the impact assessment, which has to be done, and it's looking at, maybe what will be the effect of different potential projects in the area, as Don mentioned, other roads that might be a part of a network that would then possibly connect you to a larger health service center. So that's part of the cumulative assessment that would be done and discussed with communities.
No, that's great. Thanks, Bethany. Thanks for pointing that out. And thanks for joining us today. A lot of information, a lot to digest. But we got some really good questions and a lot of, and that's great to see. And we encourage you to, to explore our website and take advantage of the information that we've made available to everyone. I did want to say a little bit of a shout out to photographer Audrey Jacob of Webequie for providing us with the beautiful pictures that you've seen during the stream. Audrey sends us some amazing pictures. She's really talented, and I'd like to thank her for that. And I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today. This was a really good session. We've had 3 really good sessions so far in the last weeks, talking about different aspects of the environmental assessment. Next week, I think we're going to have a sort of a roundup of the topics we've talked over the previous weeks, and hopefully talk to the different experts and have a bit of maybe a round table. We're still trying to figure out about what we want to talk about. So join us again next week at 12:30. These streaming sessions will continue later. This will be the last in this series of them, but we'll be doing other streaming sessions. So thanks again for joining us. Don't forget to go to supplyroad.ca and connect with us via social media as well. There's lots of information there. Thanks again, and we'll see you next week.